I grew up in Guthrie, Oklahoma, a little town just north of Oklahoma City. Had a great upbringing, all the activities that you would expect in rural America, and so it was a great place to grow up. The reason we were in western Oklahoma is because my grandfather and father purchased a rural telephone system out there. My dad had a friend that was one of the investors in the local market. He showed us a briefcase that had a cellular phone inside with the antenna you would pull up. He was able to place a call and explain the concept of cellular technology. It didn't take me long to realize this was a game changer for rural America. And the licensing process created a defining moment in my life. We started negotiating months in advance of the actual lottery date with the expectation that we would join forces with a few others, and finally had a partial market settlement whereby 3 of the 8 participants were essentially in the lottery together. If any of those 3 were in our name, then we would be the winner. Luckily, our name was drawn, and I was going to be a cellular operator. We ended up with 3 markets, 2 in Oklahoma, 1 in Texas, but more importantly, we served the entirety of Interstate 40 all the way from Oklahoma City to Amarillo, Texas. So that was where Dobson Cellular became a business. In order for rural cellular systems to be ultimately successful, we needed to build out the entirety of the market. Building out the highways and harvesting the roaming revenue was helpful, but in order to realize the total economic viability of the market, they needed to be built.
There are areas that were easily overlooked by most of industry, and Everett was one of the few pioneers who would go out there and say, no, we can make a business out here.
We started generating positive cash flow after a couple of years of operation, and then from there I started looking at the next growth spurt, which in my case was an acquisition strategy that evolved over the next 17 years.
He was expanding the footprint of the cellular properties that he owned, and I think was one of the first to recognize that markets that were ex-urban and rural, but were somewhere in proximity to large urban areas, would be valuable business properties to have.
We were able to secure the entire state of Maryland with the exception of Baltimore and Washington.
You acquire a spectrum that's been built out in a good way that matches your technology, and that also provided a really good balance for the urban-suburban market for roaming.
The pricing of the roaming, $3 a day, 99 cents a minute, was very expensive. So I started working with ideas and concepts as to how we can change that without essentially wrecking the near-term profitability of the system. The operators in Baltimore and Washington was, ironically, Southwestern Bell Mobile Systems, who at the time that Northeast Corridor was being operated and managed by Stan Sigmund. I don't know whether it was his worst nightmare or his biggest relief when we announced that we were purchasing it. All I know is I got a call from Stan saying, we need to talk. And I knew what the topic was going to be. The $3 a day, 99 cents a minute philosophy needed to go. But the solution to me was if we could integrate the networks in a manner that the consumer didn't know if they were going from one market to another. If we could tackle that concept, that problem, so that the consumer really was the beneficiary of any efforts that we had, I was convinced that demand for these roaming minutes would just skyrocket.
I think some of the values that Everett developed by growing up in a rural area still remain true to him. The care for other people. It goes to your customers that you're dealing with. We're always very careful about looking at the customer. And when we talked about perhaps selling the company, part of it was because some of the things that the larger companies could now offer these customers were more than what we could offer.
It's really gratifying to see the Wireless History Foundation honor Everett in this way.
The opportunity to call him and tell him that he was going to be inducted was one of my great pleasures as a member of the board.
He, to me, never seemed like somebody who sought out accolades, and so sometimes maybe people like that don't get noticed as much as they should.
I'm very humbled because there's literally some of my heroes in this in the business world and the wireless world have come before me, so very, very proud.